All right. Well, guys, welcome to SINFO Summoner's Rift. Get your champions ready. Let's give a big, big round of applause for Greg Street from Riot Games.
Can you hear me? Do we have the mic on? Oh, good. Thank you all so much for coming. This conference is really amazing. I would love for you all to help me give a hand to the organizers for putting on SINFO 25. So this talk I put together is kind of a retrospective of my career, which sounds super self-indulgent to me. So to try to make it relevant to you guys, I'm going to talk about a lot of the really stupid things I did in the hopes that if you're going into the tech industry or gaming, maybe you won't make these mistakes and you'll learn something from that, okay? I'll try to keep it entertaining. I know we're at the end of the day here, and afterwards I'll try to leave plenty of time for questions about anything you want. So here we go. As soon as my clicker works. There we go. So what is this talk? I've been making games for about 20 years now. I've made a bunch of mistakes, and I want to share them with you so you can avoid making them. I started life not as a video game designer, but as a scientist. None of these pictures are of me because all this happened before digital cameras were invented, and the photos were up in my attic somewhere. But I studied crustaceans. That's why I still use the crab as my icon today. I did my research on offshore oil platforms, the Gulf of Mexico and the United States. And this picture up in the corner, it was a lot of dropping things off the backs of ships, picking up mud. It was really hard work. It was fun, but it was a lot of late nights. It was a lot of getting super muddy. It was a lot of experiments that went wrong or animals that would escape and so on. Even though it was fun, it was really, really hard, and I'm pretty confident that anything you do in life is still going to be really hard. Making video games is something I love, and I hope to keep doing it the rest of my life, but it's not always easy, and even though it's a dream job for me, it comes a lot of frustrating moments as well. So I just wanted to get this out of the way up front. In graduate school, when I got my PhD, I did a lot of field work. It involved spending time in salt marshes, dropping things off of boats, getting really, really muddy. We would have a couple of times we'd be spending all day in these marshes and come back just covered with mud and then have to sneak into some restaurant's restroom to clean ourselves off. There was this one time, this didn't happen to me, but happened to a professor of mine when an older lady said, if you kids had stayed in school, you wouldn't have to work so hard, not realizing they were all scientists with PhDs and many, many years of school. But what happened was, once I got my degree and I got a job working at a university, I found that I wasn't spending any time getting muddy anymore. Instead, I was spending all of my time at a computer, writing grant proposals, and then once we would get the research, I would have to write a paper to publish it. Even though I got into oceanography because I loved the ocean, I was spending all of my time inside. It was indoors and a little boring. And after dinner, my friends would all go back to the lab and do their experiments. And I would go home and play video games. And I think I realized then I was not a good scientist. And the reason I wasn't a good scientist is because I didn't love it. And these people obviously loved what they did. I mean, science does not pay a lot of money in most areas. They were doing it because they loved to do it, and I didn't love to do it, and I felt like what I needed to do was change careers. There we go. So the second lesson I want to offer you is you will probably switch careers often. That is very common in this world for young people, and that is totally okay. I know it can be easy to panic about, I'm going to graduate, what is my job going to be? Am I making the right decision? And I'm here to tell you it probably doesn't matter that much. You will probably change careers. The careers that are available to you when you're in your 30s and 40s may not even exist today, so it's really hard to plan for them. So even if you don't end up in the tech industry, you don't end up making video games, don't sweat it if what you're studying for doesn't end up being what you ultimately do. But if you can, try to find something you love. It's very easy to get sucked into, well, maybe it's not as easy as we would wish, but it can be easy to get sucked into doing a job just for the money, just for what it pays. But in the long run, that may not be fulfilling enough for you unless you really enjoy the work you're doing. I'm going to illustrate all of these points with champions from League of Legends. That's the game I work on. Hopefully it's a game you're familiar with. If not, I won't go too deep into that rabbit hole. But we do have a lot of great art. So I stopped being a scientist, and I started making video games for a game called Age of Empires. Hopefully you're familiar with Age of Empires. These are some of the box covers, Age of Empires 2, Age of Mythology. The game looked like this, which I think still holds up pretty well today. I understand they're making a graphic update of the game. I haven't played it yet, but hopefully it honors the tradition of Age of Empires. I fell in love with Age of Empires. I didn't work on the original one. It already came out, and I played it a lot. They kind of branded the game as a real-time strategy game plus Civilization, which was a turn-based strategy game that I love and still love today. And the thing that I couldn't believe was that Age of Empires included a civilization called the Hittites. These are the Hittites. They're a bunch of dudes who ride chariots. They were enemies of the Egyptians. And they're one of the civilizations, the original Age of Empires. And I was so impressed they'd included what I thought was a pretty obscure civilization. So I fell in love with this company. And at the time, I saw an interview with the lead game designer, a man named Bruce Shelley, who had worked on Civilization and Railroad Tycoon. And in this interview, Bruce said they were looking for game designers with no experience because they needed people to make scenarios for their campaign and make random maps. So they wanted people with no experience. I had no experience. Maybe this is a job I could do. But they wanted, with the application, they wanted to make a mission using the in-game editor for Age of Empires. I had no idea how to do this. So what I did is I stayed up all night and I read a bunch of articles on the internet telling you how to do tricks, like this is an optical illusion you could make with walls to make it look like there was a bridge. So I did a lot of stuff like that to try to make my scenario really stand out. I sent it in, and the team on Age of Empires really liked it. They flew me into Dallas, Texas, USA, where the studio was, and I went through an interview, and somehow I got this job. This is the early team. I was like the 25th employee right down here when I had more hair. The working conditions starting in a very young game studio like this were pretty tough. I mean, we worked very long hours. After work, we would all go out and play dinner, all go out and have dinner together, and then we'd come back and either play games or we'd work on Age of Empires some more. And I was like, this was what I should have been doing as a scientist. So I felt like I'd finally found the right field for me. This is not my working desk, but it looked a lot like this. My first desk at Ensemble was a card table. There was a photocopier on it. The bug software we had at the time was installed on my machine. So when someone needed to check a bug in, they would have to have me Alt-tab out of my work and check the bug in and put it back in. I even remember that this desk was out in a hallway. It wasn't even an office or something. But it was great. I really loved it. I felt like the people I was with, that we were all working towards making something really great. I had forgotten about this, but a player asked me not that long ago on Reddit. This is one of the very first maps in the Joan of Arc campaign in Age of Empires 2, and I had written my initials in the corner of the map, GTS there. These are the perks of being a junior content designer. I'd totally forgotten I'd done it. Again, I was self-indulgent even 20 years ago. And I saw firsthand what game design was really like and how designers did things. I pick on this boar. So there are a lot of animals in Age of Kings. One of them was this boar. I saw a designer making a map where she spent months and months, really, trying to make this boar move from one part of the map to the other because it was introducing the story. This had very little to do with something the players would see. It was like a 5-minute part at the opening of the scenario. There was no gameplay here involved at all, and she spent a whole lot of time working on it. And I learned pretty quickly that junior designers, like this person I'm picking on, search for perfection, while the senior designers know how to avoid diminishing returns. And again, even if you're not going to go into game design in the future, I would invite you to really think about how do you know when something is good enough and move on. And this isn't about like doing a bad job, certainly, but if something is at 85% and it's going to take you months to get it to 86 or 87%, maybe your time is better spent moving on to another problem. If you saw Graham's talk before this, he mentioned, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I really, really believe in that. Your time is valuable as a developer, even if you don't think it is. And in terms of like what I do for a living, I could be spending my time doing something else for players rather than polishing something that extra little bit. So, lesson 3, perfect is the enemy of good. Good is usually good enough. In fact, I'd also say, think about how the product or the feature you're working on is how it's going to win, and really focus on that. If the part you're working on is, you need it like to support the main idea, that's fine, but if it's not what your game is all about, don't spend too much time polishing it. Very few games are remembered in this world because they have a great UI or great options menu. That's probably not where you want to spend your extra long nights working on something. So how do you avoid diminishing returns? This is a pretty simple model, but first of all, you have table stakes. These are the things you have to do. If you're making an app for a mobile phone, you probably have to be on an app store somewhere. If you're making a PC game, it needs a graphics engine of some kind. And then you need to combine that with how you win, so what you have to do to be successful. So let's imagine really quickly that we're going to open a bakery, right? So to open a bakery, you have to have certain things. You need like a physical space where you're going to sell your goods. You need to have some knowledge of how to like make your croissants or bread or whatever you're going to make. You probably need an oven and these physical parts of infrastructure. But that's not good enough. If that's all you're going to do is open up a bakery that is probably going to be outcompeted by all the established bakeries in the world. You really have to also figure out what is that thing that makes your bakery special and makes that one stand out, and then double down on that. Maybe you have the best tasting food. Maybe you have grandma's special recipe from back knows when. Maybe you can order online. Whatever it is, you need some way to stand out. It's really hard in a world with thousands of games that come out constantly on things like Steam and the Apple Store to really stand out if you're just making kind of the same thing that people have already made. Back when I was working on World of Warcraft, I'll talk about it in a minute, I would always get asked, what's your advice to developers who are trying to compete with World of Warcraft? And my answer was always, don't. You can't compete with World of Warcraft. Make your own thing that stands aside. Give players who don't like World of Warcraft a reason to play your game. So lesson 4 is finishing things is the key. Avoid diminishing returns, get something actually out there. Most games ship because they run out of money. Whether that's because you have an investor that wants their money back, or you have a publisher that you've entered into some kind of deal, or you're building something in a garage with your friends, and your friend's like, I really want to start paying rent and feeding myself again. So we have to have an income stream. And that only happens in this business where you actually get something out the door. Probably that is true of any business. Ensemble had a really strong culture of playtest. Again, this is the studio that made Age of Empires. This is an actual photo of our playtest area. People would sit here at these monitors, and then designers like me could walk around behind them and kind of see what was going on and answer questions or report bugs or that sort of thing. Ensemble, we would play, when I started out, we'd play the game every day. I think it was at 4 p.m. We would stop what we were doing and we'd play test the game. And I think it's really important when you're making software that you are constantly trying it out and forcing other people on your team to try it out. You'll miss really obvious things if you aren't constantly seeing, the idiom here sometimes is eating your own dog food. Like if you don't know what the product is, you're going to miss really obvious pain points for players. Later on, when Ensemble got too large, we couldn't all fit everyone in a single playtest, so then we would divide up days of the week. And I remember really clearly, Tuesday was the programmer day to play. We called it Angry Tuesday. because the programmers always had the harshest feedback. You know, they didn't like anything we did, and they'd always come out swing when they play a game. But that's what you want. You want that feedback because that's what is going to make your game good. And if you don't get that feedback from your own team, you know, you're going to hear it from players and reviewers afterwards. Now, I will say, play your game, but don't play it too much. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to start losing touch with, first of all, the new player experience. Most developers who play their games too much end up making them so difficult because they're so familiar with the game that they forget what it's going to be like when like a mere mortal gets in and starts to play. I also see this all the time. I'll talk about this a little bit later on League of Legends, but for example, when designers are working on a champion that might take 6 or 7 or 8 months to complete, they may have a fairly simple mechanic, but after playtesting it and looking at it for so long, they start to get bored of it, and they start like adding on extra things and changing things and questioning themselves. So just remember, you really want to play your game, but you have to get information outside of your own group of people, and you can't play the game so much that you're kind of forgetting what the end user experience is like. Does that make sense? Am I with you? Okay. This, I think, is the key to leveraging feedback in the proper way. The feedback provider is providing the information and the making informed decisions. But then the feedback receiver is the one that's ultimately getting to make the decision. And I think this is really important because if all you're doing is having someone say, hey, this is blue, but I really think it should be red, you're just going to argue about it for a long time. And the larger your team gets, the more these arguments are going to happen. Consensus is a really, really expensive thing to get, and it's usually too expensive to spend a lot of time doing. It sounds very noble, don't get me wrong, to have everyone aligned on what you want to do, but it takes a lot of time. Instead, I would suggest a better way to go about resolving these discussions is have someone who's empowered to make the decision. When we make a champion for League of Legends, there is a designer, and he or she has the ultimate final decision on how that champion is going to be. Now, they better listen to everyone else when we're saying things like, your champion is bullshit and no one's going to want to play against her. You can probably guess who I'm talking. No, I'm kidding. But ultimately, someone needs to be empowered to make that final decision. And this is true also when we're talking with players. There are a lot of players out there giving us feedback on things, and we can't listen to every single one. Or actually, we do listen to what every single person is saying, but we can't weigh all of their information evenly. There's just too many voices. Instead, you try to get a sense overall for what people are saying, and then use that to make an informed decision. If you're leaving this part out, you're just making arbitrary decisions. You're just like, I took a guess, and this is my best guess. So lesson 7, get feedback, but lesson 8, have a decider, or else this feedback process is just going to go on and on and on. So after several years making Age of Empires games, I was promoted to lead designer. I'd started as a lowly assistant designer and worked my way up, and I was now the lead designer on a title. And I almost screwed it up really badly. And the way I did this was when I would have challenges kind of explaining the type of game we were going to make to the team. And when the team would say, I don't understand the vision, what I would do is send an email to like the company president and the leads of the company and be like, you know, oh, I'm having a really hard time getting everyone on board. This is really frustrating. You know, maybe there's some way we can like, some way we can convince them. What I thought I was doing was like asking for support, but really what I was doing was telling them that I was in way over my head and that probably I was not going to be able to effectively do this job. And the reason is because to them, I didn't have confidence. I constantly doubted myself. And they recognized that, and I think it made them really nervous. I complained a lot, which sent the message that I wasn't ready. Now, I'm not saying be so self-confident that you never question anything, but you also have to have some amount of confidence to lead a team. If you can't say, hey, we're going to go in this direction, people are just going to go in a lot of different directions, which again is not very effective, and you're going to run out of money, and as I said, games ship when they run out of money. Not necessarily in a good way. Confidence is one of those things that you can fake. You probably heard the like, fake it until you make it. This really does apply to confidence. If you get up in front of a lot of people and you act confident, they're going to think you are confident, And after a while, you're going to start feeling it more and more. I've talked to enough groups, I have no problem getting up in front of crowds anymore. Early on, it was a really terrifying notion. It's a very common human experience. First time I went out at BlizzCon, they said, okay, we have an audience of 30,000 and 90,000 more watching online, so, don't make any mistakes. You can probably see my hand trembling in the first few BlizzCon videos, but I've done it so much since then that it doesn't really bother me anymore. The other thing I almost screwed up is I was a really bad manager. When I became the lead, that meant that all the other designers on the team reported to me. And so they would come into my office and ask for questions and ask for feedback, and I was like, hey, I'm trying to get some work done, can you guys not bother me? Which, as you can imagine, was not very empowering and did not help grow a new group of managers. I viewed them as a distraction. And fortunately, Ensemble had this policy where people would write anonymous reviews of their manager once a year, and I could get to read the feedback from all of my reports. And they would say things like, oh, Greg doesn't have time for me, or he thinks he's too important, he's always doing his own work and can't give me direction or feedback. And I felt so terrible. I'm like, I'm letting these people down. They're looking to me to help become better designers and to help someday become leads of their own, and I'm totally ignoring them. And I realized that in order to be a manager, you have to take that job really, really seriously. The way we talk about it at Riot is you just have to care. If you don't really care about their career, if you don't really care about them as human beings, you are going to view them as a distraction. And for some people, that's fine. Not everyone in the world needs to go into a management position where you're running a large team. Both Riot and Blizzard had this concept of someone with the title of principal, which meant you were kind of at a guru level. You were a very, very strong individual contributor, but you didn't manage other people and you didn't lead a team. And some of our least effective managers, in fact, the way I was, were the people that took the role just because they thought that's what they needed to do to have responsibility. The only way to move up the corporate ladder was to become a leader or become a manager. But if you're not really into it, you're probably going to be bad at it. So I was at Ensemble for 10 years, and we made the same game kind of over and over and over again. It was very successful. Microsoft, as our publisher, was totally happy with just making Age of Empires 5, 6, 7, on and on and on and on. And then something new came along. And it looked like this. So Act 3 is World of Warcraft. I did not play World of Warcraft when it first came out. All of my friends at Ensemble played it. And because we were working in a game studio, we'd often work late nights, and they would all be talking about Arathi Basin or Skullomance or something like this. And I was like, will you shut up about this game? I would say, if you're going to talk about WoW, I'm going to go sit at another table, because all you guys do is talk about WoW. And they said, just play it. Just make, I think it was a Troll Hunter, play it for 3 hours and let us know what you think. And I'm like, this is stupid. I'm not going to like this game. They finally convinced me to do it. And within 5 minutes, I was like, oh, I get it now. And then I played a lot of World of Warcraft. I became the main tank for our company guild. Every morning, I would send out emails to the entire company about our, telling the story of our exploits and who got what loot and how we dealt with certain bosses. And so when I reached out to some people I knew at Blizzard and asked if they were hiring, and I got the job, no one at Ensemble was surprised. No one was sad for me. They all knew this was my dream job, and they were super excited that I got to go pursue it. And the reason I got to go pursue it, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, was the guy who was leading the team was a dude named Jeff Kaplan, was moving off of World of Warcraft to build another game, and that kind of left holes in the design leadership on WoW. So in World of Warcraft, I was a systems designer, which can mean a lot of different things. At Blizzard, systems design kind of handles the numbers of game design. If you weren't a systems designer at Blizzard, you were a content designer. Content designers would do things like design the levels, build the hills and add the NPCs and the monsters, and they would make quests and things like that. Am I talking too fast? I talk very fast, and I know English is not the first language of many of you, so just let me know if I need to slow down. We would do class design. We would do talents. Because I had studied crustaceans when I was a scientist, I picked this crab as my icon, and that's where the ghost crawler thing came from. When I left Blizzard, I firmly intended to leave Ghostcrawler behind. I thought, well, that's a Blizzard thing. I need something new at League of Legends. And pretty soon after I started on League of Legends, I went to a conference. I think it was either GDC or PAX, and all the players were calling me Ghostcrawler. And in fact, half the Rioters I worked with called me Ghostcrawler. They didn't even know my name. And so I figured, okay, Riot is a very player-first company. As a player, this is my identity, so I'm just going to embrace it. So this is the Blizzard campus. Right in the middle of the Blizzard campus is this giant bronze orc statue. It's totally epic. In winter, there is a guild of players, of Blizzard employees who like to knit. So they will knit yarn and cover the entire orc with yarn around wintertime. The Blizzard design style was very different from the Ensemble design style. Ensemble, like I said, we iterated a lot on our features, and I knew Blizzard also iterated a lot, but I didn't really understand what that meant. At Ensemble, sometimes on the way to work, I'd have an idea, and I'd go to work and I'd implement it, and we'd try it for that playtest. And as you can imagine, almost always those were terrible ideas, and I'd take it out the next day. So it worked, but it was kind of inefficient. The way Blizzard thinks about iteration is they beat something up a lot before they ever put it in the game. You have to convince a lot of people that your idea is good, and they're very good at poking holes in things. So by the time you actually get to the iteration phase, there's a pretty good chance your idea is a good one and will survive. Then even after it goes in the game, we would still iterate a lot to like polish it to that last, kind of final percent of polish that Blizzard is known for. So lesson number 11 is have goals and iterate. Don't just start iterating right away. Like early on, try to figure out, why are we making this change? Are we messing with the mage rotation because we think it's boring and people get bored of it? Are we adding more talents because we think that players need a reward for leveling up? Think about what you're trying to solve and then go about solving it. Don't just start messing with things right away. Messing with things right away might eventually get you where you're going, but it's inefficient. Again, I'm trying to help you get to good quicker so that you don't run out of money. A lot of what we did in World of Warcraft was add more and more systems. Every time there's an expansion, we'd add more systems into it because we thought we needed to justify the new expansion. Like, why do you come to Wrath of the Lich King? Well, there's a new continent, sure, and there's a new class, and there's all these other systems to interact with. This was a very not awesome system that I worked on for hunter pet talents. I thought, hey, hunters have talent trees. Maybe the pet should have talent trees too. So we had this really complicated system of figuring out what abilities your pet should have. And it was something that players solved really quickly. And I'll talk more about players solving things. Players solved it really quickly and didn't interact with it much after that. So lesson 12 is a really important one that took me a long time to learn, is you really have to think about the player needs. It's easy for us as game designers to be like, oh yeah, we always think about players. But you really have to empathize, like, what is it from the player's point of view? How are they really going to interact with something like hunter pet talents? And I kind of came to the conclusion that I was doing hunter pet talents because that was kind of fun for me to make as a designer, not necessarily something that players are going to have a lot of fun interacting with. Something else I learned that took a long time, much longer than it should have, is that building the team you need to make the game is sometimes harder than building the game. And this could be true, it's particularly true early on in a project when you can't play the game. Once you can play the game, you can kind of say, hey, just sit down and play the game, you'll understand it. But early on, you're doing a lot of talking. You're doing a lot of PowerPoint and shit like that, trying to explain to people what this game is that you're making. Constantly, I would hear, I don't understand the vision. And I would say, I just sent out an email yesterday. How can you not understand the vision? It's something you really have to reinforce over and over again. It gets back to that idea of have goals and iterate. Make sure your team really understands what it is you're trying to do. because you'll find it's really common for everyone on the team to have a different vision in their mind of the game and be going in different directions making that game. So unless you're a very small team of like one person, collaboration is the key. You have to figure out how to work with other people, have to communicate to them, how to give them feedback without making them angry, or to hear feedback yourself without getting defensive. The most successful games in the world, I think, are often because they're built by the most successful teams in the world. Early on, when I was interviewing at Riot, I asked Brandon Beck Rise, who's one of the CEOs of the company, if you could have League of Legends or you could have the team that made League of Legends, which one would you pick? And he said, well, the team. Because if I had that team, I could make another game. And I thought, that was like a light bulb for me, that the hard part in this business isn't making the game, it's usually getting the team to make the game. Early on on Age of Empires, we were struggling with some kind of design problem, and I finally said, well, let's just go ask the players what they think, which is a really crazy, novel concept at the time for some reason, but it really worked, and it's something I've kept up ever since then. I've always cared a lot about talking to players, both because selfishly it helps me to understand what's not working about the game, but also really helps me with that empathy level of understanding, like, what is it, how do they perceive me, how do they perceive the team, how do they perceive the game? So I've tried things from Twitter to blogs to live streams. This is a convention I was at in Taiwan several years ago where they had all the dancers dressed as pandas and said, Greg, will you get up and dance with the ladies? And I said, no. That would be a video that would live on forever and ever. So I agreed to take a picture, but I wasn't about to dance. Learning how to communicate with your users, whether you're making application software, making a game, learning how to communicate is hard. And for me, it was mostly a process of trial and error, by which I would say something and players would interpret it differently than what I meant. And usually it was something where I came across as being like more arrogant than I intended, or I came across as I was in some kind of ivory tower, talking down to them. And I would learn with particular word choice, like I would say something and I would be like, okay, I can never say that again because, it sounded differently than what I intended. I always try to emphasize to my team that we're not smarter than players. If anything, there's a lot of them, and that collective wisdom is much more powerful than anything we have. We try really hard not to treat ourselves as rock stars that are way up here while our players are way down here. If anything, the players are the one who are paying the bills, right? They're the ones who are allowing us to make these games, and they're really the most important person in this equation. So I always try to talk to players from a position of humility and respect and thank them for, letting me have this amazing job that I have. And again, if you don't have players in the business you go into, empathy is still a really important skill to have. Put yourself in their shoes. Understand how they are approaching things, whether this is a coworker, an end user, a partner, anyone who you have to transact with. Try to understand things from their point of view, and it can often help, bridging the conversation or ending up with a solution that works for both of you. Age of Empires was made kind of before the era of business intelligence, where we didn't have a lot of data on what players were actually doing. We guessed a lot at how many players play on this difficulty level, how many players are playing on local networks versus over the internet, and so on. Around the time I was at Blizzard, we really started to gather a lot of data for what players were actually doing. And World of Warcraft, like League of Legends, was a global game that is played in a lot of different countries. And I realized that my worldview was very Western, very North American centric. And I didn't have a good sense for how players in other parts of the world played. A great example, which I'm sure you guys know by now, is that in parts of Asia, particularly Korea, most players experience PC games by going to these PC cafes where they pay by the hour to play games. League of Legends is a free-to-play game, but for them it's not necessarily free to play because they're paying for the time. And we found out that on League, when we would add a lot of stuff to the end game, like a lot of ceremony around, these are your scores, and we have the new honor system, you get to honor an opponent and things, or honor a teammate and things like that, that some Korean players would just Alt F4 out of the game because it was faster for them to relaunch the application than sit through our whole end game ceremony. And the reason was because it was just costing them money. They were paying for minutes to watch all our beautiful animations and everything like that. And that would have been a really obvious thing to miss if we were only looking at like players in North America and Europe, because for them the game was completely free to play. So my point here is to think globally. I speak English pretty well. I don't really speak any other languages. But I still spend a lot of effort to try to understand what players in different parts of the world are going through, how they view things. Overall, gamers are gamers. And I've met enough players in different countries to know that the way they think about games isn't that different, but there are regional differences, and you need to be aware of them when they happen. Part of the reason I came to Portugal to talk to you guys is because I combined it with some efforts to talk to some League players and streamers about what is it like to play League of Legends in Portugal and Spain. Riot does a really good job because we have regional partners in all of the countries where we have a lot of League of Legends players. And that helps us understand what players on the ground are talking about, even if it's not something that gets all the way to something like the English version of Reddit. So, after many years of World of Warcraft, you could see we made an expansion, then we made another expansion, and then we made another expansion. And even though I love this job and I love Blizzard, and I still was a very active WoW player, I realized I was starting to get bored. And that's not really fair to players because I'm not thinking in terms of player empathy anymore. I'm thinking in terms of like, what is entertaining for me? And that's very dangerous. So I was at this convention in Shanghai called China Joy, which is a gigantic convention. The number of attendees there is staggering. And I was on a stage, kind of like this, taking questions to the audience about World of Warcraft. And I look across the hall, and there's a booth, and I swear there must have been 10,000 players at this booth. And I asked, what is that game? It must be some Asian game I hadn't heard of. And they said, oh, that's League of Legends. And I was like, really? I thought that was like a Dota clone. Why are so many people playing this game? And I had not been really paying attention to League of Legends and what was happening and how popular it had become. And so we'd had some people who had gone from Blizzard up to Riot. They're about 60 miles apart in California. So I started to ask them, what is Riot like? And they said, Riot is a company that cares a lot about the player experience. And I thought, you know what? That really resonates with me. Maybe I do need to pay a little more attention to League of Legends and Riot. And so this happened. And Act 4, and hopefully a 4-act play, I don't intend to move around much more, is League of Legends. Hopefully you're familiar with this game. If you're not, it looks like this. If you're watching it in a professional esports situation live, it looks like this. It's a really amazing thing to experience firsthand. These are just some scenes from Riot. It's a great place to work, and I really love the people there because they're all gamers, and they all really, really care about players and about making the best experience we can. A lot of the questions at Riot get answered with, like, well, what's the value to players? So lesson 16 is, make the game for players, not for you. And I want to go along with that and say something about kill your babies. What this means is that as designers, as anyone, we often stumble on these ideas that we get really personally attached to because, for a number of reasons, because we like them, because it's our idea, because we really, really want to see it in the game. But that's not necessarily putting the player first, that's putting you first. And the best designers are the ones who can build up an idea, get really excited about it, and then be completely willing to abandon it once someone pokes holes in it and explains why they can't do something. You need to have passion with what you're doing, but you also need to be realistic and be logical and understand when you're pursuing something that really isn't going to be in the best interest of players. So let me talk a little bit about what I do at Riot. I'm the lead designer on League of Legends, which doesn't mean much in a nutshell. Overall, I'm the person who's accountable at the end of the day for the design quality of League. I work with the other leads on League of Legends. We have like the lead producer, the art director, the technical director, and we think a little bit about long-term strategy and vision. I manage the design department and, as it happens, also the narrative department. And then I fulfill some spokesperson responsibilities. So I do things like this where I can come talk to people about my job and how we think about things. The key of this graphic is that I have to do all four, and I can't just pick one and not focus on the other things. I would love to do nothing more than travel around the world and just talk to players about League of Legends all the time, but then I don't actually have any time in my life to make League of Legends. So accountability for LoL design means when something goes wrong in the game, it's ultimately my fault. I may not have made the decision because, like I said, we try to make sure that individuals can make the decisions. Believe it or not, sometimes I don't even know that the decision happened. I say this from time to time and people are horrified, but I often learn about things we do when I read the patch notes. And that's because the League of Legends team is very large and moves very quickly, and we have a lot of independent teams that are working on things. And I can't possibly be in every meeting to kind of give the thumbs up or thumbs down for those features. And even if I was, I wouldn't want to do that because that would just slow things down. All of these decisions would get bottled up waiting for us to kind of approve them or not. So instead, we try to find the right people for the job, spend our time agreeing on what the goals are, and then trust the team to go out and execute. And when it goes wrong, it's still my fault. It's still something I have to deal with. Maybe I put the wrong person in the wrong position, or maybe we didn't spend enough time talking about the goals. So since everyone is running around working on individual things, it kind of falls on the leadership team to think about where do we want to go in the next 12, 18, 24 months, and what are our big bets? We spent a lot of effort trying to kind of prioritize high-level things. Like last year, maybe a little before that, we felt like we had let player trust suffer a little bit. Players used to say things about what a great company Riot was and how they really felt like we put their needs first, and we saw that slipping a little bit. So we decided player trust has to be a really high priority for us, and we changed the priority of some of the features that we thought players would really appreciate. Like I said before, I was a terrible manager when I started out. I've put a lot of effort in that to try to be a good manager, and today I have, it's like 60 or 70 people in the department overall. Again, it's very easy to let this part take over your life. When you have a lot of people who have, individual problems and want coaching and want your feedback and want your time, it's easy to become a professional manager and forget that you actually have a product that you're trying to focus on at the end of the day. And like I mentioned before, I still talk to players. I love doing it. I get a lot of energy from it. It helps remind me what my job really is. It's about making this thing that so many people love. So I mentioned this a little bit already, but the way Riot works is kind of unusual. At Blizzard, all the artists sat together, all the engineers sat together, and so on. Riot instead uses a matrix where, say, to make a champion, there'll be a game designer, a writer, an artist, a sound designer, a producer, all working together on that champion. The reason that is really cool is the synergistic effects that develop. Rather than the artist just saying, okay, tell me what to draw and I'll draw it, the artist can say things like, oh, if the ability is going to work this way, I can make this animation work a little bit better to support this ability. And we think overall there's a lot more buy-in from the team to make these features rather than someone just kind of working on assembly line like, okay, you need a spell effect? Here's your spell effect. What's next? I also put this bit about the product is more important than the craft. Riot is not a great place for engineers who just love beautiful code or artists who just want to draw things they really like to draw. It's a place for people that want to make a great game overall. We try really hard to emphasize you're not an artist, you're a game developer. You're not a game designer, you're a game developer. You're making a game overall, and that should come first above your individual craft. So lesson 18 is be a developer, not a designer. Again, even if you're not in the game design industry, think about the overall product and your overall company's goals, not just your own little slice of things. Promise you we're getting near the end. So I stayed in touch with Jeff. We're still good friends. And we invited him to Riot not that long ago to give a talk. And he did it. And one of the first things he said was, I hate this notion that somehow Blizzard and Riot are rivals, because we're not. And at the end of the day, you know, like when Overwatch came out, I was thrilled because they had been working on this game forever, and it was so rewarding to see it finally ship. I didn't want them to fail. I wanted to have an awesome new game to play. We don't want our rivals to go out of business. We want the world will be a better place with more and more great games. So lesson 19 is, and there's only 20, I promise, we're all gamers. That's really why you get into this business, because you care about games and you want to play great games. And I'll be the first to tell you, you know, what a great time I had last year playing Horizon Zero Dawn or Persona 4. And I want those companies to kick ass and make more and more great games so I have more fun things to play. So I want to end with a question I get a lot, which is how to get into the game industry. And again, this could probably apply to any dream industry of your choice. We get a lot of resumes, hundreds a day, from people who love League of Legends and want to help us make it. And the truth is, probably some of them would be really, really good at it, but we don't have any easy way to separate who those people are. I would love to individually call everyone who applies to us and ask them questions, but that would be my entire job at that point to do that. We could also hire more and more recruiters to try to do that, but then, you know, we're just hiring more and more people at the organization who aren't working on the game itself. So you really have to do something in your application to stand out so that people will take notice of you. It's not enough to say, I love games, because almost everyone who's applying loves games. You have to prove why you would be good at this job. You have to prove why the company would be stupid not to hire you in. There are a lot of ways to do this. The best way, the most tried and true way, is to make something. In a world where we have things like Unity and Unreal and what is the Amazon thing? I can never remember. Lumberyard. Tools like this are more and more accessible. If you still find that you can't use those tools, or you know, they're just out of your reach, or it's too technically complex for you, make a mod for a game you like. If you can't do that, you know, make a board game or a card game. A friend of mine likes to say, if you don't enjoy making a card game, you're probably not going to enjoy making the next Halo. Technically, they're very different, but the process of making a game is the same. What we want to see is someone who can take something from beginning to end. They're willing to kill their babies. They're willing to take feedback and make compromises. They're willing to understand when they're at diminishing returns. It's always very dangerous when you find someone who says, yeah, I've started 10 games and I haven't finished any of them. We'd much rather have someone who said, yeah, I started this game, I got really sick of it, I got really frustrated, I had to change direction 5 or 6 times, but I finished it. That last part of getting something out the door is really, really hard, and you often want to quit, and you often want to give up. So making that little bit of, in American football, we'd say the final 10 yards to get it over the end zone. So I'd invite you to find your passion, make something. No matter what industry it is, no matter what you want to put on your resume, if you can say, yes, I got good grades, I did all these other things, and I made this thing, I think that's what really helps people to stand out. It's my favorite screenshot. I'll never give it up. League of Legends player just says, I didn't realize Ghostcrawler was old. And my favorite part of it is just kind of surprised me. He just has an observation. Anyway, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
Okay, so if you have any questions, just raise your arms. Okay, one over there, one over there.
About anything at all. There are no bad questions.
Okay, that's great. So thank you for the presentation, and thank you for coming to Portugal.
My pleasure.
Sorry for the bad weather. Last week was pretty good, though.
You know, people keep apologizing for it, but I'm from California, so we get sun all the time. So I don't mind seeing rain and wind.
Okay. So I gotta say, so I'm a PhD student. I'm just starting, and I'm at that phase where you were that I'm writing grant proposals.
Yeah.
And I'm somewhat kind of frustrated with the paper stuff. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of stuff being done in academia that usually commercial companies don't really use, particularly. So my area is artificial intelligence. So my question is, what is Riot doing in terms of artificial intelligence, since it's such a new, I mean, how can I say, such a trendy topic?
Yeah.
I was wondering if Riot is doing something different or something new, because not in terms of bots in the players, but more like, for example, player behavior.
Yeah.
So how you punish player behavior and how you detect it.
Yeah,
So
that's a great question. Where we are investing in machine learning is player behavior is a big one, because that's a case where we can't keep up as human beings with how quickly internet verbiage changes, particularly region to region. And what can be like a really offensive word in one language may be totally different in another language. And I'm not just talking about the word having different meanings. I'm talking about someone saying like, GG could be super sarcastic. And it's very hard for us to detect, if they were trying to be assholes about it or if they were legit about it. So the nice thing about using machine learning for something like this is it could just detect over time, oh, players tend to report another player when they do or say something like this. But computers are not smart. They're only as smart as you make them. And we had this great story where this player was appealing a ban. They had been banned for constantly saying, I can't believe this Akali. This Akali is so terrible. And they'd gone on and on about the Akali and said, why did you ban me? And we're like, well, it's all right here. And he said, no, dude, I was the Akali. I was making fun of myself. And we're like, okay, our machine learning has failed us. So that player behavior is one area where we're trying to do that. We're looking a little bit more at strategy in terms of like, what is a good strategy to win the game? League is a game about getting better and better at playing and having reinforcement to tell you like, oh, compared to other players, your CS was a little low at this part in the game. That's something where we don't want to just kind of establish what those numbers are. We would much rather look at the community and build up some data based on what players are doing. So that's another thing we're exploring. Sorry, I'll try to be quicker with the answers so we can get through more questions.
Okay, so next question. Yep.
So back when you joined Riot Games, I was already playing League of Legends. And I remember somebody asked you on your Ask FM, what are the main difference between working at Blizzard and working at Riot Games? And I remember you said that Riot Games was like an airplane being built already on the air.
Yes.
Do you still think that, or have you contributed to building the airplane?
I probably contributed to making the airplane fall apart, or maybe they serve better meals on the airplane now because of me, or something like that. Blizzard cares a lot about polish, and it's hard to argue with that because they make some of the best games in the world, and a lot of that is because of the really, really high quality. But the way they ensure that polish is through a lot of gatekeeping. Like, you had to have a lot of people at Blizzard say yes in order to get an idea into the game. And at Riot, it is much, much easier to get someone to say yes. We really, really want to get stuff out there. Now, what that means is some of the stuff that goes out probably shouldn't. And it's then our responsibility to react to it. We try to, because we constantly patch the game, we can react pretty quickly to player feedback. And we would rather try to move fast and make some mistakes and then try to fix the mistakes than to move a little more slowly. I do think Riot has come a long way in the last few years. It doesn't feel as much like a startup anymore. It feels more like a real company with a long-term vision. I'm confident now that Riot is going to be around for a while. I'll feel even more confident once we have more than one game out, but that's a different story.
Okay, next question.
Hi, here.
Hi.
I have two questions, so I'll be quick. The first one is, so on one end you have a massive, the majority of the player base, and then on the other end you have pro play. How does this disparity play into stuff like champion design and I'm like the runes rework?
I mean, it complicates it a lot, is what it does. One of the interesting things about pro play, people are often surprised when I say this, is we design pro play mostly with the viewer in mind. because there are millions of esports viewers, and there's only a few hundred players. Now, we don't want to make life miserable for the players. They're very important to the whole thing working out. We try to take good care of them, but we ultimately want esports to be fun to watch. It's less fun to watch when the pros play very safe, which is what pros like to do. They don't want to do something and be caught off and punished for it, and then everyone teases them about it. So instead, they try to play a little conservatively. So a lot of the things we do in the game are to try to get them to take risks and to make more flashy plays, just because those are more exciting matches to watch. Now, our balance strategy overall is we target balance somewhere around the low diamond, high plat area. And the reason is because that's a good intersection between, you're still affecting a lot of players. There's still thousands, millions of players of that category, as opposed to only balancing for Challenger, which is only 200 players per region. But that skill level is enough to really notice a difference. For a bronze player, someone just starting out, if you add 5 more AD to Garen, that's probably not going to affect their win rate as much as just playing a few more games and understanding things. But it absolutely will at the high tier. So that's kind of the good intersection between players who will actually feel differences and still affecting a sizable number of players. Now, if there's outliers all the way up at pro or all the way down for sub-level 30, we'll try to fix those outliers as well. And fans start to get bored if they see the same champions in pro all the time. So that's where we'll try to open up other options and have additional champions pros can play.
Okay, so then my second question, which is just for reassurance. First you gave us Urgot, then a Crab God skin, then we had the Rift Scuttler, now we have the Herald. So is your ultimate goal to just make League of Legends into League of Crawlers?
I'm not that self-indulgent, believe me. No, I love the Rift Scuttler. It wasn't my idea. The team totally came up with it, and as soon as I saw her, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make that my new icon. But
Okay, next question. At the back.
Back here.
hey,
Hey. For years now, people have been saying that World of Warcraft is dead with every new expansion, and every time a new game comes out, like Guild of Wars or Star Wars: The Old Republic, people say that it's going to be the WoW killer, but we're still in 2018, and WoW is still pretty big. Do you think that is it ever going to be possible for a game to kill WoW, or is WoW going to kill itself, since we are burning through a lot of lore with the last expansion in Legion?
I mean, I'm guessing right because I'm not, I have nothing to do with the game anymore, but I think WoW's going to be around for a really long time. There is a switching cost associated with a player taking all the investment they made in that game and playing a new game. And that was always the challenge with anyone trying to make a new MMO was, even if it's better than WoW by any number of metrics, is it good enough that you're going to ask someone to give away the thousands of hours they've played, gotten to know the world, built up their character, just to throw that away to try a new game that they may ultimately not like? So, will there be a new MMO someday that's bigger than WoW? Maybe. I don't think WoW's going anywhere. I think it'll be around for a long time.
Okay, final question.
Hi. Hey. I have 2 questions, but I think you can answer it only one answer. Mainly, the first one is, how do you think competition of mobile legends in the tablet and smartphone area, and as well as because of some games appear like the Mobile Legends, and how is mainly the focus of innovation and Riot, and mainly you as a designer, which is mainly on the game of dynamics or more in the gameplay, so you can be more authentic or you can keep up with the community in a large game number of players, and esports keeps sponsoring you instead of more games with a similar dynamic game? Thank you.
I think I missed part of the first question when
what do you
Mobile
think?
Legends?
But in the part, it's similar to League of Legends, but in the tablet and the smartphone.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
so how do you think you can compete, or do you think you have an engage for those type of devices in the League of Legends scene, and as well in that kind of competition? How do you try to keep up in terms of design, not only on the gameplay, but in the games or dynamic movements?
It's a really interesting question. When, for years, we considered can we make League of Legends on a different device, or is it tied to the PC? And we always said, no, you need a PC, you need a keyboard and mouse to play League of Legends. There's no way you can make a MOBA on a mobile device. And we were wrong. So that was a great moment of humility for us. We thought we understood the genre very well. a few companies in China and elsewhere have made super successful mobile versions of MOBAs. They've solved some of those control problems. I think it's very similar to when Halo came out on the console, and everyone said, oh, FPS is for PC only, and obviously they were wrong, and FPS survives just well on console. A weird thing is happening in China right now, where if you look at game apps in the US and Europe, they're mostly dominated by what we would consider to be fairly casual games. The most like hardcore games on there are things like Clash Royale, which I would argue is a pretty serious game, but still lighter than certainly something like League of Legends. But if you look at the top 10 list in China, they're all hardcore games. They're PUBG clones, they're first-person shooters, they're MOBAs. And a trillion-dollar question to the industry is China an outlier, or is the whole world going that way and it just hasn't caught up yet? I've been doing this for 20 years, and for 20 years, the PC has just about been dead, right? Oh, consoles are going to kill it, or mobile's going to kill it, and it never happened. And I'm starting to wonder, is this finally it, where China completely goes to mobile devices? Is the rest of the world going to do that, or is the rest of the world always going to stay more casual? If I knew the answer to that, I would have a lot of airplanes.
Okay, so this was the last question. Greg will be available at the showcase.